So I went to a comic book convention this weekend, and it was a small convention. It wasn't a very big one, but the experience I had was pretty amazing. And that all has to do with the people I met while I was there. So I got to meet one gentleman. Now, some of these people I actually hope to interview on my podcast in the coming months. The first gentleman I want to mention is a gentleman by the name of Roland Mann. Now, he started a company called Silverline Comics. Now, he actually started this company. See if you can see that. He actually started this company in the early 90s, I want to say, but didn't really take off, didn't do much. He started in comic books in the late 80s, early 90s, older gentleman. And he actually teaches comic book writing now. Pretty interesting. I probably had at least four different conversations with people in the independent comic book space, and it really got me excited. So I haven't read this book yet. I have issue 1 through 3. This is Cat and Mouse, and he said he wanted to capture the nostalgic feel of comic books of old. Again, not trying to necessarily repeat the success of old comic books, but he wanted that feel, that enjoyment that we got when we read these comic books, and that's what he was looking for. And I was excited as I spoke with him. Now, like I said, I hope to read this comic book in the coming days. I got a lot of comic book reading to do. I've been actually buying more comic books lately, more independent comic books. And I found that I've been more excited about reading these comic books than I have been about comic books in general in the past. And that really has got me riled up. But talking with him and seeing the direction that he has taken with Skyline Comics, here's what he told me. Now, there's a couple series he has, and you can go to, Skyline, silverlinecomics.com. And you will almost get the feeling like you've been transported back. If you've been reading comics for any length of time, you'll feel like you were transported back into the 90s, but not in a bad way. Because here's what he told me. He said, when he writes a comic, he wants you to read that book and get such enjoyment that you want to see what happens next. Like, what is next? What is going to come next? What am I going to see next? And I thought, you know what? That's great. And he told me a very interesting story. One of the things he said was comic books is part of what got him into reading. He wasn't really a reader before comic books. And I thought, you know what? I am the same exact way. Comic books is what opened the door for me to be interested in reading. I hated books before that. To keep it honest with you, I hated books. After I started reading comic books, all of a sudden, I just wanted to read in general. And I discovered the thing about reading that gets most people, it's not, and people typically don't figure this out. It's not that you don't like reading, it's that you're not interested in the things you are given. And I found this same thing to be true about, let's say, the current state of comic books. It's not that I lost interest in comic books. It's that the things that have been delivered to me from the major content houses has not really satisfied that itch. And it seems like Mr. Rowland really wants to satisfy that itch. And I really can't wait to have a conversation with him about comic books. And he said he can talk forever. And I said, you are the kind of man that I want to talk to about this thing. And him being an industry vet. And he had a couple people at his table that were also industry vets. Some artists, some inkers, some story writers. And it was so exciting. And this was just one, I want to say, his conversation was one of, let me see, 4 in total. And these conversations lasted probably, I would say, 3 hours, 3.5 hours between all of these conversations. They were interesting. I bought some books. I can't wait to read some of these books. And I thought, man, this is what comic books are missing. As I said, it was a small comic book convention, and it really excited me because I'm realizing more and more, and I've said this before, there are people in the independent comic book space that will not let the thing that we geeks love die. And it's not like they're trying to single-handedly save everything, but they love this just like we love this, and they happen to be creators. And many of them have gone their own way and done their own thing and abandoned the major names to start their own thing, to bring the fans what they want. And like I said, I'm excited to start this book, Cat and Mouse. Now, he gave me a brief synopsis of the story, and he showed me some of the art. And that's another thing. I feel like these independent comic books are a welcome return to the quality you used to get from comic books. And I'm not saying that it was always the most mind-blowing thing you've ever read. This is kind of how I view comic books of old. Comic books of old are like a good fast food joint. It wasn't always the best food you ever have. Now, there are certain items on the menu that were definitely mind-blowing, and you would go back for more every day. But even if you got something else, even if it wasn't your favorite and it wasn't the best thing you ever had, it was always tasty and always satisfying. You always left and thought to yourself, I'm glad I went there to eat. This definitely hit the spot. And I feel like that's what these independent creators are getting back to with the art and the stories. As I thumbed through some of these independent books, I thought to myself, oh man, this is nice. I'll tell you one of the most interesting stories. And I'm kind of keeping some of this close to the hip because some of these people I hope to actually interview. We talked about this when we had our conversations on my podcast. One of them is a gentleman who's a lawyer, still a lawyer. His daughter got into comic books and he noticed, this is what he said, the over-sexualization of some of the women in some of these comic books. And he just didn't like it. So he decided he was going to write a comic book, got into writing comic books and actually have written some different things. I bought one of his books and he's another one that I hope to interview. Looked through the book and the art was good. It was so satisfying. It's almost like, what can I compare it to? It's like having that, whatever pastry it is you like, whatever pastry you want to insert you think of, and you get this pastry homemade and you eat it. It's not, again, you're not losing your mind, but you're just like, man, this really hit the spot. This is good. That's how I felt. Like I said, small comic book convention, and it was probably to date one of the best conventions I've been to. These conversations really changed it for me. It really encouraged me that the comic book genre that many of us love is not just going to lay down and die. It's not going to go away. There are people who are definitely bringing you the things you want. They're out there, and hopefully I get to cover some more of them on this podcast.